The teller's name was Amber. I know that because I had been coming to that branch on Union Avenue for 11 years, and Amber had been there for most of them, a young woman with dark hair and a specific professional warmth that made the ordinary business of banking feel like something a little more human than a transaction. She knew my name. She asked about my wife by name for a year after Patricia died, which I appreciated in the quiet way you appreciate people who remember that grief doesn't expire on a schedule. On the morning of a Thursday in October, I walked through the glass doors of First Tennessee Bank on Union Avenue in Memphis at 10:15 in the morning, approached the window, and asked to withdraw $3,000 from my personal checking account. Amber smiled. She asked for my ID. I handed it over. She typed. She looked at the screen. And then she went still. Not the ordinary stillness of processing a transaction. The specific stillness of a person whose eyes have landed on something that their professional training is now managing very carefully. She looked at the screen for a moment longer than the information required. Then she looked up at me with an expression that was working hard at being neutral and not entirely succeeding. She said, "Mr. Harris, could you give me just one moment, please?" She picked up the phone on her desk. She turned slightly away from me. She spoke in a low voice I could not fully make out. She set the phone down and looked back at me and said, "Someone will be right with you. If you could just wait one moment." I looked at her. I said, "Amber, what's wrong?" She said, "I'm going to have Mr. Goodwin come out to speak with you. He's the branch manager." "Just one moment, Mr. Harris." She said my name twice in 30 seconds. That is the thing you do when you are trying to make a difficult situation feel safe. I had been a CPA for 33 years. I had sat across from clients delivering difficult financial news more times than I could count. I knew what it looked like when a person was managing you toward a conversation. I stepped to the side and waited. The lobby of the Union Avenue branch was doing its ordinary Thursday morning business around me. An elderly woman at the next window, a young man at the ATM in the vestibule, a mother with a stroller waiting behind the velvet rope. The ordinary mechanics of an ordinary morning. 30 seconds later, a door to my left opened, and a man in his 40s with close-cropped gray at his temples and a blue blazer walked toward me with the expression of someone who has received a specific instruction about how to look when he approaches a specific person. He extended his hand. He said, "Mr. Harris, I'm David Goodwin, branch manager. Would you mind stepping into my office for a moment?" I said, "Of course." I followed him through the door and down a short corridor to a corner office with a window that looked out onto Union Avenue and a desk with 2 monitors and a chair arranged across from it for precisely this kind of conversation. He closed the door. He sat down behind the desk. He turned one of the monitors toward me, carefully, deliberately, like a man who has decided exactly how he is going to deliver what comes next. He said, "Mr. Harris, I want to show you something before we discuss what I'm about to tell you. At 8:47 this morning, a person entered this branch and made a cash withdrawal from your personal checking account. The withdrawal was for the full available balance, $22,460. He let that sit for a moment. He said, the withdrawal was accompanied by a signed authorization slip bearing what appeared to be your signature. Mr. Harris, per our fraud protocols, I reviewed the transaction after our system flagged an anomaly, and I want you to see what the security camera recorded at 8:47 this morning." He clicked the mouse. The monitor showed a security camera feed from above the teller windows, time-stamped 8:47:23 in the upper right corner. The image was clear, clearer than most bank cameras because this was a newer branch with updated equipment. The person at the teller window was a woman. She was tall, well-dressed, dark hair pulled back. She was wearing a gray coat I recognized immediately. She was my daughter. I looked at that image for a long time, long enough that David Goodwin, to his credit, said nothing and did not move and allowed me the silence that the moment required. I said, very quietly, "That is my daughter, Constance Harris Beale." He said, "Yes, sir. That is what we believed as well, given the account name." I said, She is not authorized to make withdrawals from this account." He said, "No, sir. The account is in your name only. The authorization slip appears to bear a forged signature. We have suspended the transaction pending our internal fraud review, which means the funds have not yet cleared. They are currently frozen." Frozen. The money was frozen. I sat with that word for a moment. I sat with everything it implied, and everything it meant, and everything I had understood to be happening over the past several weeks, that I had been building toward exactly this confirmation. I said, "David, I appreciate how you've handled this. I need to ask you one question. Is the money still in the account?" He said, "The cash was dispersed, Mr. Harris, but our fraud hold means it cannot be further transferred or deposited by the recipient. The total amount is effectively frozen pending resolution of the fraud investigation. If you file a police report today, which I strongly recommend, we can begin the formal recovery process." I said, "I'm going to need a complete copy of the transaction record, the authorization slip, and a still image from this security footage." He said, "We can have all of that prepared for you within the hour." I said, "Thank you." I sat back in the chair. I looked at the frozen image on the monitor. My daughter, in her gray coat, at my bank, at 8:47 in the morning, while I was at home, making coffee with no knowledge of what she was doing across town. But here is what she did not know. Here is the part of this story that changes everything that comes after it. What my daughter did not know, when she walked into First Tennessee Bank on Union Avenue at 8:47 on a Thursday morning in October, was that 3 weeks earlier I had moved every dollar of my actual savings to a different institution entirely. The $22,460 in that personal checking account was not my primary wealth. It was the amount I had deliberately left in the account she had access to my records for. It was, in the most specific sense of the term, the amount I had decided I could afford for her to try to take. Because I had known she was going to try to take it. I had known for 3 weeks, and I had spent those 3 weeks getting ready. My name is Walter Harris. I am 67 years old. I live in Memphis, Tennessee. And the education that brought me to that chair in David Goodwin's office on a Thursday morning in October cost me $22,000 in frozen funds, and 33 years of professional discipline, and the specific, unsentimental clarity of a man who has spent his entire working life reading numbers that other people hoped he wouldn't look at too closely. My daughter made a mistake that every person who tries to steal from an accountant eventually makes. She assumed that because I was old and alone and grieving, I was not paying attention. I am always paying attention. Welcome to True Story. Hit that subscribe button and drop your city in the comments below. We read every single one. Let's get into it. I spent 33 years as a certified public accountant in Memphis, Tennessee. The last 18 of those years I ran my own firm, Harris Financial and Tax Services, out of a 2-room office on Poplar Avenue that I had started in 1998 with 2 filing cabinets, a used desk, and 11 clients who had followed me from the regional firm where I had spent my first 15 years learning the profession. By the time I retired in 2021, Harris Financial and Tax Services had 47 individual and business clients, a staff of 3, and a reputation in Midtown Memphis that I had built one correctly filed return at a time, one audit that went the right way at a time, one client who came to me in a panic about something and left calm because the numbers actually worked out. Numbers do not lie. This is the central truth of accounting, and the reason I have always found comfort in the discipline, because I grew up in a house where a great many things were said that did not match what was actually happening, and I had gone looking for a profession where the record was the record and you could not argue with it. Patricia would have said I became an accountant because I was a stubborn man who wanted a job where he could always be right. She would have said it with a specific smile that she reserved for observations that were both affectionate and accurate. She was usually accurate. Patricia Ann Harris, born Patricia Ann Weston in Brownsville, Tennessee in 1954, was the kindest person I have ever known in the functional sense of the word, meaning her kindness was not decorative, It was operational. She was a social worker for the Shelby County Department of Children's Services for 26 years, and she brought to that work the same quality she brought to everything, which was the conviction that people were more than their worst circumstances, and that it was worth treating them that way, even when the evidence was discouraging. She kept a garden in the backyard of our house on Tanglewood Drive that she tended from the first warm weekend in March through the last in October, with a patience and a specificity that I found both admirable and somewhat baffling, because I have never fully understood how a person learns which things want more water, and which want more sun, and which want to be left alone entirely. Patricia knew all of that. She kept notes. She had notebooks for the garden the same way she had notebooks for everything, and after she died I had found those notebooks in the potting shed, and had stood there for a long time holding them. Patricia died of a heart attack in August of 2022. She was 67 years old. She had had no prior cardiac history of significance. She had been healthy and present and ordinary on a Friday evening, and she was gone by Saturday morning. That is the form of loss that does not give you any of the preparation that other forms give you, and I am not going to describe what those first weeks were like, because they are mine, and because the description would not serve this story. What will serve this story is this. Patricia died in August of 2022, and by October of 2022, which is to say 7 weeks after her death, my daughter Connie had asked me 3 separate times about the status of my estate plan. I had 2 children. James was 39 and lived in Nashville, where he worked as a high school history teacher, and called me every Tuesday evening and most Sunday mornings, and drove down to Memphis twice in the months after his mother died, without being asked, and had never, not once, asked me a single question about money, or the house, or what I intended to do with either. He had his mother's operational kindness. He had also, on 2 separate occasions over the past year, told me quietly, and without accusation, that he was worried about Connie, and that he thought I should be careful. I had heard him. I had not acted quickly enough on what I heard. Constance Harris Beale was 43 years old. She lived in Germantown, a suburb east of Memphis, with her husband Brian Beale and their 2 teenage daughters. Brian worked in commercial lending at a bank on East Poplar and had the particular manner of someone who has calculated exactly how much warmth is required for a given social situation, and applies precisely that amount, and not a fraction more. He shook hands firmly and remembered sports scores and asked the right questions at family dinners, and had never, in 12 years of being my son-in-law, said a single spontaneous thing in my presence. Connie was my daughter, and I loved her in the way you love a child, who has made choices you would not have made, and become a person who is harder to be around than you hoped. She was intelligent and capable, and had both of those qualities pointed in a direction I had recognized for years, and had spent those years refusing to name directly, because she was my daughter, and because Patricia had always said that Connie would find her way, and I had deferred to Patricia's judgment on most things of this nature. Patricia was gone, and Connie had started asking about the estate within 7 weeks. The questions were framed correctly. The concern in her voice was textured and plausible. She mentioned that she had a friend whose parent had died without an updated will, and the complications that had followed. She mentioned that Brian had some experience in estate planning matters through his work, and would be happy to review anything if it would help. She mentioned, once, that the house on Tanglewood Drive was probably worth a significant amount in the current Memphis market, and that it might be worth understanding the tax implications of the asset before any decisions were made. The house on Tanglewood Drive. The tax implications of the asset. I noted every one of those conversations in my work notebook, dated and summarized, the way I had noted every significant conversation in my professional life for 33 years. Because I am an accountant, and notation is not a choice, it is the job. By January of 2023, Connie was also asking about online banking. She said she was worried about me managing everything alone. She said Brian had helped set up online bill pay for his own parents, and it had simplified their lives enormously. She said she could help me set it up if I would give her my login credentials so she could configure the settings properly. I told her I had managed online banking without assistance for 11 years and was confident in my ability to continue. She said she just wanted to help. I said I appreciated that. I noted the conversation. In March of 2023, I came home from a grocery run to find Connie in my study. She had a reason. She was looking for a photograph she remembered from a box of Patricia's things that she thought might be in the study closet. That was plausible. Patricia had boxes in that closet. But when I came into the study, Connie was at my desk rather than at the closet, and she closed the laptop that was open there before I fully registered that the laptop was open. I did not say anything in that moment. I noted it after she left. I spent the following week reviewing my financial accounts with the specificity that I had spent 33 years applying to other people's finances. I looked at everything. Every account, every statement, every login record. I found two things. The first was that my personal checking account on Union Avenue had been accessed from an IP address in Germantown, Tennessee, at 2:47 in the morning, on a night in February. The access had lasted 4 minutes. No transactions had been made, but someone had logged in, someone who had my credentials, someone who lived in Germantown. The second thing I found was an application inquiry on my credit report that I had not initiated. A pre-qualification request for a home equity line of credit on the Tanglewood Drive property, submitted online, in my name, in January. The request had not resulted in an approved line of credit because my credit freeze, which I had maintained for years as a professional precaution, had blocked it. But the inquiry was there. January. While Connie was asking about online banking access. I sat at my desk for a long time looking at those two things. I am an accountant. I know what a finding is. I know what it means when a pattern in the data is not consistent with the stated facts. I had known this pattern for a long time, and had been filing it in the place where you file things you are not yet ready to call what they are. I was ready to call it what it was. The next morning I called an attorney. Her name was Deborah Lyle. She was 58 years old, a Memphis attorney who handled estate litigation and elder law, and who had an office on Madison Avenue above a dental practice, which I mention because the specific detail of what is above and below a law office tells you something about what kind of practice it is, and this one was not fancy. It was working. There is a difference, and I have always respected the working kind. I had found Deborah Lyle through a referral from a colleague, a fellow CPA, who had sent 2 clients to her over the years for estate disputes, and had described her in the specific terms that one professional uses to recommend another. She is thorough, and she does not like surprises. Neither do I. I walked into her office on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock with my work notebook, a printed summary of the 2 findings from my financial review, and a copy of my existing will, which had been drafted in 2019 and had not been updated since Patricia's death. Deborah Lyle reviewed everything without comment, the way that the best professionals review information, completely and without the performance of reaction. When she finished, she set the papers down and looked at me. She said, "Mr. Harris, I want to ask you a direct question. In your professional judgment, based on what you have documented here, do you believe your daughter intends to take action against your estate?" I said, "I believe she is in the process of doing so already. The credit inquiry and the account access are not things that happen by coincidence. They are reconnaissance." She said, "And your son, James?" I said, "James has warned me twice in the past year. He is not involved in what Connie is doing. I am certain of that." She said, "What do you want the outcome to be?" I said, "I want my estate to go where I decide it goes. I want Connie to understand that I knew what she was doing and that I had handled it before she got far enough to cause irreversible damage. And I want there to be a record, because I am an accountant, and the record is the only thing that matters in the end." Deborah looked at me for a moment. She said, "Those are achievable outcomes. Let's talk about structure." What Deborah recommended, and what I executed over the following 3 weeks with the speed and precision that 33 years of financial practice makes possible, was this. I dissolved the jointly held estate documents that still listed Patricia as co-holder on 3 accounts. I established a revocable living trust, the Walter E. Harris Family Trust, naming James as successor trustee and sole residential beneficiary. I transferred the Tanglewood Drive property into the trust. I opened a new primary savings account at a different institution entirely, Regions Bank on Madison Avenue, under the trust structure, and transferred my primary liquid assets there. I left the First Tennessee personal checking account on Union Avenue open. I left it with a balance of $22,460. I left it open because I understood, with the cold clarity of a forensic accountant looking at a set of books, that Connie had my login credentials and had been watching that account. If I closed it abruptly, she would know something had changed, and she would change her approach. If I left it open with a balance that looked like my usual operating funds, she would see what she was looking for. I also called the First Tennessee branch manager's office and asked to speak with whoever handled fraud prevention matters. I was connected to a woman in the compliance department named Ruth Langford. I told her what I had found and what I believed was about to happen. I told her the specific account number and I told her what I expected to see. I asked her to flag the account for enhanced monitoring and to contact me immediately if any unusual activity occurred. Ruth Langford said, "Mr. Harris, in 20 years of bank compliance work, I have received perhaps 3 calls like this one." I said, "How did those situations resolve?" She said, "Favorably for the people who made the calls." I said, "Good, that's what I need." 3 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in October, I drove to Union Avenue to make a routine withdrawal, and the teller froze at her window. I filed the police report at the East Precinct on Tillman Street that afternoon. The officer who took the report was a young man named Davidson, who wrote everything down carefully and told me that given the amount and the evidence, the matter would be referred to the Financial Crimes Division. He took the copy of the security still that David Goodwin had prepared for me, the signed authorization slip with the forged signature, and the complete transaction record. The financial crimes detective assigned to the case was a woman named Sandra Pruitt, mid-50s, compact and precise, who called me the following Tuesday morning and asked me to come in and bring everything I had. I brought everything: the work notebook with 14 months of dated entries, the printed account access records showing the February login from a Germantown IP address, the credit report with the January inquiry, the summary of the 3-week asset restructuring I had completed before the October bank visit, and a separate document I had prepared over the weekend, a timeline of every financial and estate-related conversation I had with Connie, from October 2022 through October 2023, dated, summarized, and cross-referenced against my personal calendar. Detective Pruitt looked at the timeline for a long time. She said, "Mr. Harris, you prepared this yourself?" I said, "I was a CPA for 33 years. Preparing documentation is not something I do when I need to. It's something I do as a matter of course." She said, "The credit inquiry in January. You have the bureau report here showing the Germantown IP origin of the online application." I said, "Yes. The inquiry was submitted through the lender's online portal from an IP address that traces to the Germantown, Tennessee area, the same geographic location as the February account access." She said, "And you have documentation of the account login on the night of the February access." I said, "My bank's compliance department flagged it after I alerted them. I have their written confirmation of the anomalous login and the IP trace." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Mr. Harris, with the security footage from the bank, the forged signature on the authorization slip, the credit inquiry, and your documentation of the account access, you have built a substantially complete evidentiary record." I said, "That was the intention." She said, "Why didn't you come to us in March when you first found the account access?" It was the same question Detective Boulware had asked Raymond Ostrander in Baton Rouge. These are the questions that investigators ask when they encounter someone who documented rather than reported. The answer is always the same in its structure, even when the specifics differ. I said, "Because in March I had an anomaly. I had a login from the wrong location at the wrong hour. An anomaly is not a case. A case is what I had in October, with the footage and the signature and the complete timeline. I needed to be certain of the full shape of it before I acted. She said, "And now you are." I said, "Now I am." She looked at me steadily. She said, "We'll open the investigation. I'll be in touch within the week." I called James from the parking lot outside the police precinct. He answered on the second ring. I told him what had happened: the bank, the teller, the security footage, the police report. I told him about the February login and the January credit inquiry, and the 3 weeks I had spent restructuring the estate. I told him all of it, in the order it had happened, and he was quiet throughout, in the way that he is quiet when he is listening, rather than waiting to speak. When I finished, he said, "Dad, how long have you known?" I said, "I have been building the documentation since March. I have known what it was since then. I did not want to tell you before I had confirmed it, because I did not want to put you in a position where you knew something you couldn't act on." He was quiet for another moment, then he said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm clear. Clear is what's available right now." He said, "Do you want me to come down?" I said, "Not yet. Wait until I know more about the investigation timeline. There will be a moment when I'll need you here, and I'll tell you when that moment is." He said, "Okay, and Dad, for what it's worth, Mom would have seen this coming a year ago." I said, "I know. She was always faster than me on the human things. The numbers I'm good at. The human things take me longer." He said, "You figured it out." I said, "I did." I drove home to Tanglewood Drive. I sat on the back porch in the October afternoon and looked at Patricia's garden, which had gone to seed, in the way that a garden goes to seed when it hasn't been tended by the person who knew it. There was still structure to it, because Patricia had built it on good bones, but the specific intentions of it were blurring at the edges, and I had not had the knowledge to maintain them. I thought about the notebooks in the potting shed. I thought about going to get them. I thought about the possibility that Patricia's notes would tell me enough to restore what she had built to something close to what she intended. I went to get the notebooks. I brought them to the porch and I read them in the October light for an hour, following her handwriting through 3 seasons of a garden she was not going to see again, and I understood for the first time with any precision what she had been growing, and why, and what each thing needed. I went inside and made dinner. I called James and we talked for 40 minutes about nothing much. He did not ask about Connie again, and neither did I, because there was nothing left to say about Connie that was not now in the hands of a financial crimes detective, and moving through a process that had its own timeline. The investigation took 11 weeks. I was contacted 3 times by Detective Pruitt, and once by an assistant district attorney named Robert Carver, who was methodical and unhurried, and who reviewed my documentation with the attention it deserved, which was considerable. What the investigation established was this: between October 2022 and October 2023, Connie had accessed my online banking credentials through the laptop in my study during her March visit, which was confirmed by the digital forensic analysis of the session logs. She had used those credentials to monitor my account balances for 7 months. She had submitted the January home equity application, which had been blocked by my credit freeze. She had forged my signature on the October withdrawal authorization and presented it at the Union Avenue branch, where the teller's training had triggered the correct fraud protocol. The forensic examination of her phone, conducted under the search warrant Detective Pruitt obtained in November, revealed a notes application in which Connie had maintained a running record of my account balances over 8 months. The final entry was made the morning of the bank visit, at 7:58, 49 minutes before she walked through the doors of First Tennessee on Union Avenue. The notes entry read, "Account balance as of this morning, $22,460. Moving today." She had been tracking it. She had been watching and waiting, and had chosen a Thursday morning when she believed I had no particular reason to go to the bank, had no appointments in the early part of the day, no reason to check my balance before she was done. She did not know that I had put the appointment in my own calendar 3 weeks earlier. She did not know that I had asked David Goodwin to call me the moment anything unusual happened on the account. She did not know about Ruth Langford in compliance, or the enhanced monitoring flag, or the new Regions Bank account on Madison Avenue that held what the Union Avenue account appeared to hold. She had spent 8 months watching a number on a screen and had walked into a building to take that number and had not known that the building was ready for her. Brian, when the investigation reached him through the digital record of the conversations he and Connie had exchanged via text and email about the plan, hired a separate attorney from Connie's and provided a statement in which he characterized his role as limited to general awareness and expressed significant concern about events he described as having gone in a direction he had not anticipated. Detective Pruitt told me about Brian's statement with the specific dry economy of someone who has heard the general awareness characterization before and has a precise opinion about it. Connie was charged in January with theft of property, forgery, and criminal simulation. The charges were supported by the security footage, the forensic account of the credential access, the phone records, and the notes application entry from 7:58 on the morning of the bank visit. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea. The case was scheduled for trial in the spring. She did not contact me between the October bank visit and the January charges. I did not contact her. James called me every Tuesday and Sunday, as he always had, and we talked about his students, and the garden, and the books I was reading, and the particular politics of a Memphis November, which is a subject of some local complexity. We did not discuss Connie on most of those calls, because there was nothing useful to add to what was already in motion. I went to see Deborah Lyle in November, after the charges were filed, to review the trust structure and confirm that everything was correctly positioned. She reviewed all of it and said it was clean. She said the trust structure would be unaffected by the criminal proceedings and that the Tanglewood Drive property and my primary assets were fully protected. I said, "And the $22,000? She said, "The fraud recovery process is underway through the bank. Given the frozen transaction status and the strength of the evidence, First Tennessee has indicated they expect to make you whole. It may take a few months, but the amount is recoverable." I said, "I know. I left that amount in the account because I was willing to lose it if that was what the case required. I did not expect to get it back. That it appears I will is a better outcome than I planned for." Deborah looked at me for a moment. She said, "Most people in your position don't think about it that way." I said, "Most people in my position are not accountants." She almost smiled. Connie entered a guilty plea in April. The agreement included full restitution, a suspended sentence with 5 years of probation, and a permanent notation on her criminal record. Robert Carver called me after the plea and told me the resolution was the strongest outcome available, given the evidentiary record. I told him I understood and that I appreciated his work on the case. The restitution payment arrived in June. I deposited it into the Regions bank account on Madison Avenue and noted the date in my work notebook. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and I sat with the fact that it was over, which is a different kind of sitting from sitting in the middle of something and takes a different kind of time. James drove down from Nashville the weekend after the plea. We sat on the back porch in the April afternoon, and he helped me understand one of the things Patricia had been growing along the south fence, a plant I had been unable to identify from the notebook description alone. He knew because Patricia had told him about it once, and he had remembered. He said, "She planted it because birds like it in the fall." She said the seeds were specific to certain birds that came through in October. I said, "I've been trying to figure out what it needed." He said, "It wants less water than you'd think." She wrote that somewhere. We found the right notebook page later. She had, "Less water than you'd think." That was Patricia, precise even in the margins of things. We talked about Connie that afternoon, once, for about 15 minutes, in the way that people talk about things that are resolved but not over. James said he had tried to understand how it had gone this far, and I said I thought the answer was the same answer that most financial fraud answers resolve to, which is that the person believed the target was not paying attention, and the belief was comfortable enough that the plan became real to them before they fully accounted for what paying attention actually looked like. He said, "She should have known you better." I said, "She knew me 33 years ago. She did not update the information." He said, "That's a very accounting way to put it." I said, That is the only way I know how to put things. The garden is doing better, not what Patricia had, not her level of intention and knowledge, but better than it was. I have been following her notebooks as precisely as I can, and I have been learning the things I should have learned while she was here to teach them. The south fence planting put out seeds in October exactly as she said it would, and I watched from the kitchen window on several mornings as the specific birds she had intended arrived to take them. She would have been satisfied with that, not surprised, just quietly satisfied, in the way she was satisfied with things she had planned carefully and that had worked out correctly. That is the garden she built. She built it for the birds, and for October, and for the person who would be in the kitchen window, watching after she was gone. She built it, as she built most things, not just for the present moment, but for afterward. I built my financial documentation the same way, not for the moment when I would need it, for the moment after, when having it would determine what was possible and what was not. 33 years of professional habit applied, in the most personal possible way, to the most personal possible situation. The record was the record, and the record was mine. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Hit that like button, subscribe if you are not already here, and I will see you in the next one. True Story uploads every week. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss one.